is a narration of a report we've just published on Substack titled Truth, Justice, Freedom, a re-evaluation of the annual 1984 Remembrance Rally. The full piece is available on Substack to read, which you can also access any of the links and references that we mentioned during the course of this. Firstly, before we begin, some acknowledgments. So the following has been produced by collecting multiple Vichaars from members of Bunga Azaadi anonymously. Whilst I, Ranjit Singh, is narrating this, the authorship of this piece is attributed to the Gupt Vicharaks who contributed their valued perspectives and put this together. Introduction and disclaimer. This work has been created out of love, humility and hope, not from a belief that we have all the answers. We are simply one voice among many in the Sikh community offering ideas that we hope can contribute to a wider and necessary conversation. Firstly, it must be recognised with full respect that the global Sikh community is already engaged in many of the efforts described herein, from independent Sikh media platforms to humanitarian server organisations, from digital activism to educational projects. Countless Sikhs around the world are already making vital contributions. We honour and deeply respect these initiatives. However, much of the current work remains fragmented, under-resourced or focused on symbolism rather than systemic impact. The examples presented in this document, drawn from other communities around the world, demonstrate that sustained, structured and strategic action tends to yield far greater long-term results. We are not suggesting that remembrance or rallies are meaningless. Rather, we are questioning whether we have allowed tradition to harden into routine, without the kind of dynamic and evolving response our circumstances require. Please do not take this report as an attack on the organisers of the 1984 Remembrance Rally or those who attend. We have the utmost respect for the time, energy and intention that go into making such events possible. Many of us who contributed to this document have attended these rallies ourselves for years, stood in the crowds and listened to the speeches. We understand the emotions, the honour and the historical significance involved. But with that closeness comes responsibility. If we truly want to implement what is shouted as slogans or written on banners, truth, justice, freedom, we must go much further than walking around in central London and hearing familiar speeches. We must ask hard questions, take bold steps and organise for action beyond a single day of remembrance. Secondly, we do not claim a monopoly on truth in the same way how we reject anyone claiming that only they have an answer and we, as a Panth, are meant to blindly comply. We submit these thoughts humbly to the Panth, knowing they must be refined, critiqued, debated and improved through respectful and professional discussion and debate. We invite all to contribute their ideas, collaborate in this discourse and contest any idea they feel are counterproductive. We believe that the future of the Khalsa Panth requires that we drop our egos, overcome our factionalism, return to the founding spirit of the Khalsa, unity with purpose, sovereignty with humility and activism rooted in Gurmat, thinking influenced by the Guru. Only together, genuinely together, can we transform our current strength into real political, legal and social power. Regardless of whether one believes in Khalistan or not, or whether one envisions a sovereign homeland or reforms within existing frameworks, there does seem to be a shared principle that every Sikh desires: freedom from oppression, dignity for our people and justice for all victims of tyranny. Punjab has suffered deeply, politically, economically, environmentally and spiritually. It continues to suffer today. Annual rallies have played a role in keeping our flame of memory alive. They have maintained awareness, especially among younger generations. For that, they deserve respect. However, we must also be honest with ourselves. For decades, rallies alone have not delivered the justice, protection or political progress our people deserve. Without strategic structure, coordinated follow-up, political influence, legal strength and institutional resilience, they risk becoming symbolic rituals, heartfelt but ultimately limited in impact. Our Shaheeds did not sacrifice their lives only for us today, to blindly and ritualistically gather once a year, recycle victim narratives and sell their faces on clothing and then go home and forget about it. We have to do more than tick in a box. This report is offered not as a final solution, but as a contribution to a conversation that belongs to all Sikhs, and indeed to all people who believe in truth, freedom and justice. The limits of the rally. Take the posters and videos often posted in the lead up to the rally. Bold, striking, emotional. It promotes the 1984 Remembrance March and Freedom Rally in London. The message is clear, the intent is sincere, but after decades of similar events, one question remains: what has actually changed? Despite strong turnout, passion and visible solidarity, justice for 1984 has not advanced. The Indian state remains unmoved. British institutions and officials, while occasionally expressing sympathy, continue to avoid holding India to account. Media coverage tends to be fleeting and surface level, often reducing the event to a cultural, historical gathering rather than a call for international legal and political intervention. Why? Because protest without power or follow-through rarely results in transformation. It is one thing to march, another to mobilize. One thing to chant for justice, another to build the structures required to deliver it. A rally without influence is simply noise to those who hold power. From a strategic perspective, there are several limitations to the current rally format. 1. Preaching to the choir. Most of those in attendance already know the facts of 1984. They are emotionally invested, historically aware and politically sympathetic. While it may reinforce some internal unity, it does little to engage new audiences who might help build broader pressure, especially policymakers, journalists, lawyers and human rights bodies who are not present. 2. Passive engagement. A march followed by speeches on a stage often limits participation to spectatorship. Even with large screens, choreographed banners and powerful slogans, the crowd remains largely passive. There are few mechanisms for dialogue, organising or concrete next steps. The energy frequently dissipates as soon as the speeches end. Real change cannot happen without the application of either soft or hard power, or a combination of both. Peaceful protest, when used merely as a symbolic expression of dissatisfaction, is rarely effective on its own. Unless it is part of a coordinated and strategic effort, it risks becoming little more than a public display. One could reasonably argue that the continual emphasis on and restriction to peaceful protests may function as a psychological operation, a way of keeping communities distracted, their resources drained, and their momentum trapped in a cycle of inaction. 3. Missed political opportunity. With thousands present in the heart of one of the world's most influential capitals, there is rarely a coordinated political plan attached to the event. The rally is almost treated as if it is an end in of itself, not a launchpad for further advocacy. Even if some believe these steps do not lead to immediate results, they can still create a platform where different viewpoints are discussed and where the community can collectively explore the best political path forward. 4. A lack of policy consequence. Unlike structured lobbying or legal campaigns, a protest rally, especially one repeated annually in the same form, places no formal demands on institutions. There is no mechanism of accountability. Governments and the likes of the United Nations are not pressured to respond, because no framework of sustained engagement accompanies the event. 5. Dilution through repetition. Over time, the impact of a rally diminishes if it becomes routine and without result. Without new tactics, updated messaging, or evolving strategy with tangible progress, the event risks being seen, even within the community, as symbolic rather than impactful. Its emotional power becomes background noise to the public, policymakers, and even participants themselves. 6. Failure to convert awareness into action. Awareness is important, but insufficient. Unless that awareness is channeled into structured action, legal filings, lobbying appointments and educational curriculums, cultural interventions or economic leverage, it becomes a cycle of remembrance without result. Nonetheless, it is important to note that rallies do have a role. They show solidarity, they honour the martyrs, they maintain public presence. But on their own, they are a low-impact strategy for a cause as serious and systemic as state-sponsored mass violence. Justice for 1984 requires more than presence, it requires power. It requires us to ask, what do we want the outcome of this rally to be? And what are we doing the day after, the week after, the month after to make it happen? Until the rally is embedded into a broader architecture of political, legal and cultural resistance, its effect will remain largely emotional, felt deeply by those who already care, but ignored by those who must be compelled to act. Where is the accountability? If we are serious about the principles we so often repeat, truth, justice, freedom, then we must first apply them within our own house. Accountability is not just an administrative virtue, it is a spiritual and strategic necessity. It is about ensuring that leadership, decision-making and resources are used and guided by Gurmat and the community interest, not ego, routine or inertia. We cannot cry for justice from external institutions while tolerating a lack of standards and transparency within our own. To become a respected voice in international forums, we must first demonstrate maturity, structure and sincerity in how we manage our own platforms, especially high-profile ones like the annual Remembrance Rallies. Below are key accountability areas that must be addressed by those who organise such events. Financial transparency. Where does the money go? Every year, tens or even hundreds of thousands of pounds are spent on organising coaches, permits, stage equipment, speakers, media screens and security. While these logistical needs are understandable, the community has a right to ask, is there a public record or report of how these funds are collected or spent? Are Gurdwaras, charities or individuals donating transparently consulted or informed? Are Sangat given an opportunity to provide their view? If they agree the rally should go ahead with a certain amount of money spent, or if they do not agree, can a portion of the overall spending be directed into other areas that may have greater impact, such as supporting Shaheed families, providing new careers for released political prisoners or other initiatives? Could a portion of these funds be redirected annually into long-term strategic efforts like legal action, lobbying, education or memorial building? Could it be used to fund future generations of Sikh youth in positions of political, legal, academic or media influence, where long-term change can be shaped from within institutions? This is not about criticizing Seva, but about making it more effective. Without transparency, we risk losing both trust and opportunity. Accountability here is not suspicion, it is standard practice. Many respected charities and religious bodies publish annual reports outlining financial flows and project outcomes. The Khalsa Panth deserves no less. If the fund donations Sikhs are obligated to give is being spent, it should be strategically invested, not simply consumed by annual repetition. This ideally should be a standard practice for all Gurdwaras. Even a simple bulletin board post displaying the accounting would be a meaningful step forward. Another aspect to consider with this is that practices and processes are often sustained where there is an economy built around it. When there is an infrastructure that has become embedded where certain organizations or individuals are benefiting financially from what is already the status quo, they become very resistant to change, and in some cases the incentive to make it clear they have financial interest is also low. For instance, if the event revolved around keeping people in a specific area, then those who use that situation as an opportunity to sell things such as merchandise, food, or even the team responsible for the venue and stage equipment would naturally be hesitant to a change in focus that may direct people away from congregating like that. Purpose and outcomes. What are we actually trying to achieve? Rallies must not become ends in themselves. Every major gathering should begin with a clearly stated objective. Is it justice for families of 1984 victims, recognition of the events as genocide by international governments, policy change through UK Parliament, educating the wider public about Sikh history and human rights? If none of these objectives are explicitly stated and tracked, we risk gathering year after year without progress. Without defined goals, it is impossible to assess whether we are moving forward, standing still, or slipping backwards. A good movement asks the question every year, did we get closer to our goal? If not, why not, and what will we do differently? Outcome review. What happens when we do not meet our goals? Not every campaign will succeed immediately, and that is understandable. Justice often takes years, but what is not acceptable is failing in silence year after year without adjustment. Even worse is deluding ourselves in thinking we are making progress when we are not, thereby perpetuating cycles of counterproductivity. We must build a culture of reflection. Are organisers reviewing what worked and what didn't after each rally? Is there any post-event analysis shared with the Sangat? Are strategies being updated based on evolving political, legal or media landscapes? In every other field, education, business, charity, there are evaluations, metrics and improvements. Why do we tolerate less when it comes to our causes? Leadership accountability. Who decides and how? A successful movement must have dynamic, evolving leadership, or at the very least freedom to operate without restriction or be non-consensually affected by the actions of others. Yet in many cases, the same individuals or committees oversee rallies year after year, often without transparency about who appointed them, what consultation took place, whether new or younger voices are being invited to participate, what standards are being used for decision-making. Today, we often see a small circle of organisers repeating the same methods, the same speakers, the same results, without any mechanism for community review, replacement or rotation. Whilst each individual may have the right to do what they think is best without having to get consensus from the whole Panth first, provided that it is ethical, they do not have the right to represent or speak on behalf of the whole Panth, with no regard to the various views and opinions of those whose identity they are claiming. To do so is a violation of the self-autonomy of each member of the Khalsa Panth in particular, and thus a direct insult to the Guru. There are ways in which this important question about representation and leadership can be addressed, and for those interested, we recommended assessing our Vichaars related to misalization and the concept of Sabbath Khalsa for more detail. Emotional versus strategic action. Are we just going through the motions? Emotion is a powerful motivator, but it cannot substitute for structure. The Guru built institutions like the Azaadi and Guru Ka Langar not as emotional gestures, but as systems of power, equality and resistance. When certain systems became dysfunctional or corrupt, they would replace them and try something new. Just like how the Masan system devised by the earlier Gurus were dismantled by Guru Gobind Singh and replaced by the Khalsa, an institution which later was elevated to the status of Guru itself. The Azaadi itself also largely fell out of use as a political centre after Guru Har Gobind Sahib, and authority was later superseded by the Guru Khalsa. Read Sikhs Have No Pope for more information on this. The Khalsa today, by virtue of being gifted the status of Guru, has the authority to change processes when something is no longer working. How exactly this is done and how consensus is reached goes outside the scope of this piece, but for more on this, again, read the Vichaar on Sabbath Khalsa published by Bunga Azaadi and accessible in the Vichaar repository at bungaazadi.com. The bottom line is that every year we display powerful images, play moving music, and hear speeches filled with fire. But then what? How is that emotion being translated into policy proposals, new legal cases, political engagement, youth training, global media content? If emotion is not harnessed into action, it evaporates. A rally with no plan beyond visibility is not progress, it is performance. A new standard for the Panth. We do not need more slogans or louder speakers, we need a higher standard. A standard where transparency is crucial, not optional. Goals are defined, not abstracted. Progress is measured, not ignored. Leadership is accountable, not eulogized. Emotion is channeled, not wasted. The Khalsa Panth has all the tools it needs. What it lacks is accountability, coordination, and therefore results. What we must now demand is internal governance worthy of our external struggle. If we expect the Indian government to answer for its crimes, then we too must be willing to answer for how we operate the resistance. The cost of doing the same thing. Each year, immense amounts of money, time, and human energy are poured into the logistics of rallies. These include hiring coaches, printing promotional material, booking sound systems and screens, managing stage production, securing police permissions, and organizing food or supplies for participants. Volunteers give their time generously, Sangha donates generously, but after all this, the fundamental question remains: are we spending our resources in a way that actually gets us closer to justice? Remembrance is necessary, but remembrance alone is not a strategy. When the same formula is repeated year after year, with no measurable progress in terms of political outcomes, legal accountability, or institutional change, we must ask ourselves, what is the opportunity cost of doing the same thing? Before outlining some suggestions for improving the rallies, first, let's go through 5 potential alternatives that could yield far greater long-term returns for the Sikh community if even a portion of rally resources were redirected. 1. International legal campaigns. Justice delayed is justice denied, and the denial of justice for 1984 has continued for over 40 years. Yet, international law offers avenues for action that go far beyond protest signs. Funds used for logistics could be strategically reallocated to hire international legal teams specializing in crimes against humanity, genocide, and transnational justice. These teams can file legal challenges in courts with universal jurisdiction, such as in Germany, Canada, or the UK, against individuals responsible for orchestrating the violence. Preparing case files for submission to International Criminal Court, ICC, UN Human Rights Council, or regional human rights bodies such as the European Court of Human Rights, and support survivors and witnesses with legal and psychological documentation, enabling their stories to meet evidentiary thresholds in international law. For example, the Rwandan and Bosnian communities were able to secure convictions against war criminals through international tribunals many years after the crimes occurred. The Yazidis are doing the same now with Germany's federal courts. If we are prepared to spend £100,000 on one rally, could we not spend £50,000 helping build a legal case that might achieve an actual arrest warrant or a UN report, or even the naming of Indian officials in a human rights violation registry? 2. Policy and lobbying groups holding governments to account. How could Sikhs hold governments accountable when they ignore human rights abuses by India? Use foreign policy levers. This first requires Sikhs to have the right economic political influence to do so, but once obtained, pressure can be applied to Western governments to tie trade agreements and defence deals to Indian human rights records. For example, ask why is the UK giving economic incentives to a country accused of impunity in mass violence? Crucially, these campaigns should be directed at audiences outside of just the Sikh community. We must stop preaching to the choir and highlight double standards and hypocrisies to the wider public, putting pressure on politicians seeking to appeal to vote banks. Mobilise diaspora voting blocs. Make Sikh votes count by organising politically active communities that demand rights based on foreign policy platforms from candidates. Leverage global legal precedent. When one government, for example Canada or Germany, takes a strong stand, use it to pressure others, for example the UK, through coordinated campaigns. Create MP accountability scorecards. Track and publish which MPs support Sikh issues and which ones ignore them, as other communities do to great effect. The goal is not just protest, it is to build political cost for ignoring Sikh pain and political reward for standing with our cause. Petitions and speeches are only one part of influencing government policy, but if we engage in things like building permanent policy institutions that can pressure governments consistently and credibly, then we could amplify and direct this energy even further. A professionally staffed Sikh lobbying organisation could meet with MPs, peers, civil servants and diplomats year-round, not just during Sikh Heritage Months or June events. Submit formal reports and position papers to parliamentary select committees on foreign affairs, home affairs and international development. Present evidence to all party parliamentary groups, APPGs, on human rights or religious freedom, securing inclusion of Sikh cases in official inquiries. Engage with international human rights reporting mechanisms, such as the Universal Periodic Review (UPR) process at the UN, where governments are reviewed on their human rights performance. 3. Sikh-owned media infrastructure. Media is one of the most powerful tools for framing how the world sees our community and how our community sees itself. At present, we largely operate in community-only echo chambers with limited presence in national or international journalism. To change this, we must invest in Sikh media production houses that create professional-level documentaries, animations and podcasts about 1984, ongoing injustices in Punjab and Sikh political thought. Training Sikh journalists to enter major newsrooms such as the BBC, The Guardian, Channel 4, international outlets like Reuters or Al Jazeera. Launching fact-checked multilingual media campaigns targeting specific audiences, societies we live in, UN observers, youth voters, etc. Developing media watchdog teams to respond instantly to misreporting or defamation against Sikhs in public discourse. For example, the Jewish community has multiple organizations like Honest Reporting or Camera that hold media outlets accountable, issuing formal complaints, corrections and follow-ups. We must ask, do we want to keep broadcasting to ourselves, or do we want to start shaping the global narrative? Additionally, we must take a very important consideration to aesthetics. This may sound pedantic at first, but the reality is, so much of what goes into informing people's mindsets is not only about the content, but the context around how the message is being portrayed. It is not what you say, it is how you say it. Having a professional aesthetic goes a long way in cementing domain authority and being taken seriously. These standards extend to the UI of platforms, the type of clothing Sikh representatives wear, to the sophistication of language used, even down to the accents. This must all be considered seriously as part of any public-facing activity Sikhs conduct. Appearing on the news dressed in tracksuits and donning balaclavas, shouting slogans in languages the wider public does not understand, or behaving inappropriately in general, is not good optics and taints the perception and the reputation of any campaign Sikhs wish to conduct. 4. Scholarships and leadership development. Every successful community builds its own leadership pipeline. We urgently need Sikh politicians, civil servants, lawyers, economists, academics and negotiators who are rooted in Panthic values but fluent in global systems. To do this, we must fund undergraduate and postgraduate scholarships in public policy, international relations and media and law, as well as fellowship programs that place young Sikhs in parliament, human rights NGOs and international organizations. Summer schools or boot camps that teach Sikh youth lobbying skills, legal basics and public speaking and diplomacy. Even mentorship networks that connect Sikh professionals with the next generation. Rather than asking where are our Sikh MPs, we should be asking what have we done to train them. Additionally, once Sikhs get into such positions or offer contributions to these areas, they should be welcomed and engaged with seriously by existing Sikh organizations and not automatically assumed to be a threat to the hierarchy. A gatekeeping attitude is not productive, and instead it is imperative we form institutions and systems where discussion is fostered, new ideas can be presented openly, and disputes can be resolved professionally. An annual rally may raise awareness, but it does not create a future policymakers or diplomats. Investment in leadership, education and facilitation systems will. 5. Local community empowerment. While we gather to talk about justice on the global stage, many Sikh families at home in the UK, Canada or Australia are struggling with basic issues, unemployment, addiction, youth violence, racism in schools and identity loss. What if rally organisers partnered with the local Sikh grassroots groups to fund safe spaces for vulnerable Sikh youth, to support survivors of domestic abuse and trauma, run Punjabi language and Sikh history workshops in schools, and offer free legal clinics for immigration, housing or employment discrimination? This is justice too. A strong Panth starts in the home. Global justice begins with healthy, supported local Sikh communities. Improving the annual June rally. The above alternatives should not be viewed as a threat to the rally necessarily. If there is still sufficient desire to maintain them, then the following suggestions could be ways to improve them and maximise their impact. 1. Mass leafleting and public education. Most attendees at the rally are already aware of the events of 1984. However, the general public often remains uninformed or misinformed. Therefore, organise coordinated teams to fan out and distribute leaflets, infographics and short booklets in high footfall areas across London. Trafalgar Square, instead of being some temporary bubble, becomes a strategic resupply point that supports volunteers in their outreach or actively invites in audiences from the wider public to get educated on the topic. By getting greater public awareness outside the Sikh community, the rally becomes reframed as a broader human rights campaign rather than an internal commemoration or display of public mourning. If others don't know our history, we must take responsibility to inform them face to face. 2. On-site legal and advocacy workshops. Many Sikhs attend rallies with a deep desire to contribute, but often lack clear pathways for meaningful action. To channel this energy, set up mini workshops or tents at the rally that provide practical training on how to contact your MP, write to international human rights bodies, support victims, or preserve digital evidence. These stations should act as hands-on learning spaces that empower individuals with tools and confidence to act beyond the event itself. This ensures the rally isn't just a moment of emotional unity, but a launchpad for civic engagement. Trafalgar Square should become a kind of pop-up training camp, equipping Sikhs with tools and knowledge to pursue justice. 3. Breakout strategy sessions and town halls, or darbars. Rallies can generate powerful momentum, but too often they miss the opportunity to harvest ideas from the Sangat or sustain engagement beyond the day itself. Instead, pre-planned speeches are held, often by the same groups and organizations, repeating the same rhetoric much of the audience are already well aware of and have not resulted in much progress. To counter this, organizers should facilitate small group discussions during or after the event. Open brainstorming circles where attendees can voice ideas, concerns, and visions for future action. Document and share these insights publicly and create follow-up working groups to carry them forward. It is also an opportunity to assess sentiments and concerns. This not only increases volunteer engagement, but ensures the community can voice valuable feedback. The Sangat must not be treated as a passive audience, but as a potential wellspring of wisdom to draw from. There will be bad ideas and good ideas, but the only way to find out which are which is to first hear them, then test them through respectful and professional discussion and debate. Bunga Azaadi has developed a dedicated structured debate format that could be utilized for these scenarios, which you can find out more about on our Substack. 4. Calm down, speak English, and don't embarrass the Panth. Public rallies are moments where Sikhs can visibly represent the entire Panth, not just to each other, but to the wider world. It's essential, then, to carry ourselves with clarity, dignity, and composure. Heightened emotions are understandable, and even deeply justified, but as Sikhs, our spiritual practice should equip us with the ability to regulate emotions too. Maintaining decorum, speaking in the local language, and presenting ourselves calmly helps ensure that the message reaches beyond our own community. When speeches are delivered in English or the dominant local tongue, it invites understanding rather than alienation. Without this, even well-intended actions can be misread as threatening by those unfamiliar with our history. A rally should feel like a stand for justice, not a spectacle of rage. As Sikhs, our presence must uplift the image of the Panth, showing the world that our struggle is grounded in discipline, compassion, and moral clarity, not just blind passion or rage. Fundamentally, a rally is an exercise in public relations. Final reflection, strategy over sentiment. Finally, no one is saying these rallies must stop. They have played an important role in preserving memory and visibility, but we must ask ourselves honestly, after decades of rallies, has anything changed at the structural level? How long will we continue to invest resources into events that remind us of injustice, but do not take concrete steps towards justice, that make us feel heard, but leave us no more powerful? If the Panth has money to spend every year on remembrance, why do we have so little invested in institutions that pursue justice and further the cause of Khalsa Raj? The emotion of the rally should spark us into action, but that action can't just be more rallies for the sake of doing rallies. We can't just raise awareness so that more Sangat becomes aware, so in turn, they can raise more awareness. There has to come a point where those who are aware move beyond awareness raising and into practical steps towards achieving justice. Otherwise, these campaigns become an exercise in recycling victim narratives, which risk developing a Panth stuck with a victim mentality. Therefore, if we really want to move forward, then we urge next year's budget to not just only include the usual venue hire and coach fees, but also funding to enable the various proposals highlighted in this report. If organisers are open to directing next year's funds towards more impactful outcomes, we urge them to seriously consider the suggestions outlined in this piece. To the Sangat who are reading or listening, this is also your responsibility. Raise your voices, engage with the organisers, and communicate the need for change. Here at Bunga Azaadi, as a Sikh think tank, we are ready to support any organiser who wishes to take this step forward. We can offer guidance, strategic planning, and practical help in fleshing out any of these ideas further and coordinate them as part of a wider grand strategy for Khalsa Raj. All they need to do is reach out. Waheguru Ji Khalsa, Waheguru Ji Ki Fateh.